riding a roller coaster, the point is to have fun, to enjoy yourself, to have a good time. In fact, there are many great roller coasters out there. I even made a video a few months back talking about my top 25 favorite roller coasters that I've ridden. However, there are some coasters out there that just plain suck. These are the rides that you'll ride just for the credit and never want to ride again. They make you wonder why they even exist, they're so bad. These are the rides that have you coming off with a headache, backache, or in some sort of pain, and not a good kind of pain either. These are the rides that are just unbearably rough or just plain boring, or both. These are the rides that have gained a terrible reputation, usually for a good reason. Granted, I haven't ridden that many terrible coasters, but these are the top 10 worst roller coasters that I have ridden. Alright, so starting off with the best of the worst, we have Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket at Universal Studios, Florida. And this ride is not very good. It's a Morrison sit-down X-Car coaster. It's actually the only, correct me if I'm wrong, the only major Mora coaster in the States. And it's just not that great. It's really pretty rough, actually, which is pretty disappointing, considering it's not that old. It just does not run very well. It's got a bunch of mid-course brake runs. It's just got a really bad layout. It has a bunch of, like, random turns and stuff. It does have some good airtime moments. And I do like the onboard audio where you can actually choose the song. That's cool, and the vertical lift is fun. And the restraints are actually pretty nice, but the drop and the non-inverting loop are pretty underwhelming, not very good. The rest of the ride's just mostly just random boring turns and just a bunch of mid-course brake runs. It's really long and boring. The best part is probably that turnaround towards the beginning of the ride. But other than that, it's just not a very good ride, and definitely one of my least favorite coasters that I rode in Florida. Alright, so taking the number 9 spot is going to be Hurler at Carowinds, and this is probably, honestly, the worst wooden roller coaster I've ever ridden. It's just really boring and dull, and it's pretty rough, and it just doesn't give any airtime. The layout's really just boring and repetitive and not very good. I mean, it's not super rough, but the fact that it does have a bit of roughness is just kind of, like, dumb and annoying. There really isn't any airtime, and it's just really boring and doesn't give any force. It's just got a bad layout. I definitely think this could be a good contender for the RMC treatment, or just to replace it, you know, with a better wooden roller coaster, like from the Gravity Group or GCI. But as of right now, Hurler at Carowinds is just not a very good ride. The 8th worst coaster I've ridden is by far the worst Wild Mouse I have ever experienced. This is Gotham City Gauntlet, Escape from Arkham Asylum at Six Flags New England. Now, not only does this ride have just a really dumb name, it's just ridiculously long. I really don't understand the name, but anyways, the ride itself is not very good. The turns are really, really way too jerky, and all of, like, the airtime moments and stuff, and just all the turns come at you way too quick. It just slams you around, and it's really uncomfortable. There isn't a ton of padding, so it's just not very fun. I just don't really like getting slammed around that much. It's just a really uncomfortable ride. I think just the fact that the speed you take these turns at, how much you get slammed around, just why this ride is so bad. It's just really uncomfortable. There's some cool theming, but just all the elements come at you way too quick. It's just way too jerky, and that's why it is one of the worst coasters I've ridden. Number 7 is going to be by far the worst aerodynamics mine train I've experienced. Runaway mine train at Six Flags Great Adventure. Now, this ride is just not very good. There are definitely some really, really bad and rough and jerky transitions, and some really abrupt and painful airtime moments, like where you get thrown over a hill and out of your seat really abruptly, especially that last hill before that turn over the water. You just get thrown out, and it's really uncomfortable. The turns just really jerky, and the transitions are just really bad. It's just a really bad older aerodynamics coaster. It's pretty rough. It does have a nice setting, and you know, a lot of it takes place like in the woods, and you do get some nice views of some of the other rides at Great Adventure. I do like how it has that turn over the water, so it is pretty photogenic, but the ride itself is just really rough. It's got some really abrupt and painful, jerky airtime moments and jerky turns and bad transitions. It's just not a very good ride, and definitely the worst mine train I've ridden. Number 6, also a coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure. This is Harley Quinn's Crazy Train. This is definitely the worst coaster in the park. It's just really dumb. The turns are pretty jerky, and the fact that there's like literally no padding, and it's really weird. The lap bar is literally just like this small metal bar, and if I remember correctly, it is a shared lap bar, and the side is just like this plastic like siding. There's no padding at all, so you just get slammed around. It's really uncomfortable, and the transitions are just really bad, and it's actually pretty painful. It kind of hurts, and the fact that it goes around twice is just kind of dumb. It's just kind of, I mean, it is a family coaster, and it's just the fact that it's a family coaster and it's like this painful and jerky and rough and uncomfortable. It's just kind of bad, and it's definitely the worst coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure. Alright, so starting off the top 5, we have Blue Hawk at Six Flags Over Georgia, and honestly, this ride isn't horrible, but it really isn't good either. I do like that they gave this ride the vest restraints, so you don't really get any headbanging, and honestly, there isn't that many like points where your head is like jostling around, but there are some pretty rough moments and bad transitions. Like that first 2 inversions, those are kind of weird, and pretty bad transitions. You gotta get jostled around, and the corkscrews are really bad too. The rest of the ride isn't terrible, but there is still some headbanging, and it's just not a very good layout, not a super good ride. It just is pretty uncomfortable, and definitely my least favorite coaster at Six Flags Over Georgia, but it's not horrible, so that's why it's not higher on this list. Alright, so coming in at the number 4 spot might actually surprise some people, but might not surprise some others. So this is going to be Firebird at Six Flags America, and for those of you who haven't ridden it, you might be surprised by this. Now, I never rode Apocalypse, but I heard that ride was actually pretty dang smooth, and even the people who have ridden both Apocalypse in its stand-up form and in Firebird for its floorless form, that it got way rougher. And this ride is really not smooth. It's just constant headbanging throughout the ride. The second half is a lot of just like really jerky turns, similar to like Rougarou, where you're just constantly getting your head smashed around. That corkscrew gives some headbanging. Even the turns in the first half gives some pretty bad headbanging. It's just headbanging throughout. It's really rough, really shaky, just not very enjoyable. I think the little bit of theming that this ride has and that fire effect is pretty cool, and I mean, it is intense. It's just kind of short. The layout's not very good, and just because a lot of headbanging, it's just really rough. It's just not a very enjoyable ride, and definitely my least favorite B&M, and definitely the roughest B&M I've ridden, so that's why it is coming in at number 4. Number 3 is going to be Flashback at Six Flags New England, and this is just a really, really bad ride. I had ridden another Bakoma boomerang before this, and that was Flying Cobras at Carowinds, and that's actually one of the better boomerangs from what I've heard. But this ride I've heard is definitely one of the worst. It is just really not good. I did ride towards the front, so it wasn't as bad, but there was just a lot of headbanging. It was just really, really rough. Some of the transitions just weren't very good. The all trains and restraints really don't help with just how bad this ride is. Definitely beats around quite a bit. The headbanging is pretty bad. I did come off with a headache. It's not the worst coaster I've ridden, but it is definitely one of the worst. That's why it's in the top 3 on this list. Alright, so number 2 might actually surprise you because it's not number 1. This is going to be the Bakoma SLCs. And I've ridden 2 of these, being Riddler's Revenge at Six Flags New England and Mind Racer at Six Flags America. And they're both just absolute garbage. Mind Racer was my first, and this ride is just terrible. The transitions are so rough. This whole ride is just really rough and shaky. There's just constant headbanging. The restraints are terrible. Really, every element's bad. Except the drop is good, but like all the inversions and the bank turns and stuff are really bad. And just every transition's really rough and headbangy. The pacing on these rides is kind of weird. I do think the layouts are actually pretty good. Like if B&M did this, or if Bakoma did like a modern style SLC, I think it actually could be pretty good. There's a lot of potential. It's just, out of the SLCs I've ridden, they're just really rough and shaky and uncomfortable. Riddler Revenge was the same. It was just really shaky and uncomfortable. It didn't give any headbanging, but the restraint I found because of the positive forces came down on me and kind of stapled me, so it made it really uncomfortable. But Mind Racer is definitely way worse. It's just really shaky, rough, just give you a massive headache. These things are just not good. SLCs are just absolutely terrible. They really are as bad as most people say, at least the ones I have ridden. Just some of the roughest coasters I've ever ridden, and they're just really terrible. Alright, so coming in at number 1 is going to be the Bakoma Hang & Bangs, and this is pretty much the nickname used for the older generation Bakoma family suspended coasters. This includes like Flying Ace, Aerial Chase at Kings Island, Kitty Hawk at Carowinds, or Flight School at Legoland. This isn't like Dragonflyer. This is the older ones that have the over-the-shoulder restraints, and I've ridden Flight School at Legoland, Florida, and Kitty Hawk at Carowinds. And these rides are complete and utter garbage. I don't understand how like a family coaster could be this unbelievably shaky. Like, these things are just so rough and shaky throughout the whole ride. If you're not braced, you're gonna get an insane amount of headbanging. On Flight School at Legoland, which was my first one, I wasn't really ready for it, so I got just like a ridiculous amount of headbanging, just bashed around. That was just a horrible experience. It was just terrible. Fortunately, with Kitty Hawk, I was prepared for it. I actually got a tip from Phantom Coasters. Definitely make sure you go subscribe to him. Basically, what you do is there's these little like metal bars on the side, and if you push your body forward, using them like as forward as it can be, along with your head, you're basically bracing your whole body. It won't be as bad, and you won't really get like bashed around or like headbanging like if you aren't bracing. So it won't be as bad if you do that, but if you don't really brace, it's terrible. And I say these are about as equally as shaky as the SLCs, but the reason these are worse is just because they're not as exciting. SLCs, you know, they do more than these, so that's why they're a little bit better, but these are both just almost equally bad, and these Bakoma Hang & Bangs are just so shaky. Some of, if not the roughest coasters I've ever ridden. It's just terrible. Headbanging, just headache machines. They're just absolutely horrible. Definitely the worst family coasters out there, and the worst coasters that I have currently ridden. Alright, so that'll be about it for the top 10 worst roller coasters that I have currently ridden. As you can see, I haven't ridden that many terrible coasters, as some of the coasters that are towards the bottom of this list aren't that bad. And I am still yet to ride some, you know, what I've heard pretty bad coasters like Corkscrew at Cedar Point, just because I didn't really care enough to get the credit when I went, but I will ride that when I go back to Cedar Point. Manhattan Express, Ninja at Six Flags St. Louis, there's Goodrick at Park Asterix, which I've heard some people say is really bad and some say isn't that bad. And, you know, there are some other, you know, probably really bad coasters out there, but this is just the top 10 worst coasters that I've ridden. I'm definitely not expecting most of you to agree. This is probably a pretty weird ranking of these rides. This is just my opinion. I mean, honestly, none of these are really good rides at all. In fact, I don't like any of them, but some of them aren't terrible. But these are definitely my top 10 least favorite roller coasters that I've currently ridden. So that'll be about it for this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.